Some prisons are built so carefully that escape is the only proof you were ever free. England, 1826. The house where Bertie White had grown up slept heavily around her, thick with candle smoke and wedding preparations. Outside her window, the grounds lay still beneath a pale sky, peaceful enough to suggest that nothing cruel could possibly happen within its walls. Bertie stood motionless in her small bedchamber, her hands folded tightly in front of her, listening to her own breath as if it might betray her. On the chair beside the bed lay the dress chosen for her wedding. It was neatly pressed, perfectly respectable. It looked nothing like freedom. The words she had overheard an hour earlier refused to quiet themselves. Not spoken in anger. Not whispered in secrecy. Spoken calmly, as if her future were already settled. Once married, she would have no legal standing. Once married, the inheritance left by her mother would pass out of her hands. Once married, any resistance could be dismissed as willfulness, instability, ingratitude. Bertie had always been told she was fortunate. Taken in. Provided for. Guided. Yet in that moment, she understood with terrible clarity that she was not being married for her good. She was being transferred. Quietly. Efficiently. Permanently. She was 22 years old and had no allies left in the house that claimed her. She did not cry. She did not argue. She packed nothing that could not be carried in one hand. When she stepped into the corridor, she did so barefoot, moving carefully past portraits of people who had long since stopped seeing her at all. By the time she reached the neighboring estate, the sky was already lightening. She slipped through an unlocked entrance meant for servants and found herself in a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books. A fire burned low in the hearth, its warmth enough to pull the strength from her legs. Bertie hid among the shelves and told herself she would leave at dawn. She did not count on being found. At first light, Marcus Hale, Duke of Ravenshollow, entered his private library expecting silence and order. Instead, he found a young woman wrapped in a green shawl, standing rigid between his shelves as though the room itself had turned against her. He took in her fear, her exhaustion, the way she held herself as if bracing for judgment. And in that still moment, before a single word was spoken, a choice presented itself. He could summon her guardian. He could restore order. Or he could listen. That decision, made in the quiet of a library at dawn, would undo everything both of them believed about control, protection, and choice. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The house had belonged to her uncle for 7 years, but Bertie White had never felt at home within its walls. She stood now in the small chamber that had been hers since childhood, listening to the sounds of preparation echoing through the corridors below. Servants moved with purpose. Voices carried instructions regarding flowers, seating arrangements, the timing of carriages. Tomorrow morning, she would descend those stairs in white silk and be married to a man whose face she could barely recall. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the window frame, staring out at grounds she had walked 1,000 times. The garden stretched toward a line of trees that marked the boundary of her uncle's estate. Beyond that lay neighboring lands she had seen but never visited. The world had always seemed vast from this window. Tonight, it felt impossibly small. Behind her, the wedding dress hung like a ghost against the wardrobe. Cream silk with modest lace at the collar. Respectable. Appropriate. Chosen without her input and delivered 3 days prior with her uncle's approval already sewn into every seam. Bertie had tried to be grateful. She had tried to understand that marriage was expected, that her uncle had obligations, that a woman in her position had few alternatives. But gratitude had become harder to summon when she realized the truth. She was not being married for her future. She was being sold for her past. The realization had come 2 hours earlier, when she had passed her uncle's study on her way to supper. The door had been slightly ajar, and voices drifted into the hallway with the careless confidence of men who believed themselves unheard. Her uncle's voice first, clipped and irritated. The sum is agreed upon. Once the marriage is formalized, the inheritance transfers under his management. The debts will be settled within the month. Another voice, smooth and unfamiliar. And if she resists? She won't. Her uncle's tone carried the weight of certainty. She has nowhere to go and no legal standing to challenge the arrangement. Once married, any claim she might make can be dismissed as hysteria or worse. Women of unstable temperament lose control of their affairs quite easily. The pause. Then laughter, low and dismissive. Bertie had not waited to hear more. She had walked calmly to her chamber, closed the door, and stood in silence while the world she thought she understood crumbled around her. Her mother's inheritance, the modest sum left in trust when she died, meant to provide security, independence, a measure of safety. Bertie had been told it would remain hers. She had believed it would remain hers. She had been wrong. The marriage was not about affection or duty or even propriety. It was a transaction. A legal maneuver designed to transfer control of her money into hands that would use it to settle debts she had never incurred. Once married, she would have no claim, no voice, no recourse. And if she resisted, she would be declared unfit. Bertie pressed her forehead against the cold glass and felt the last thread of hope snap cleanly in two. She could not marry tomorrow. She could not stay. The decision came not with panic but with clarity. She would leave tonight before dawn, before the house stirred and the trap closed completely. She had no plan beyond that. No destination. No allies. But staying meant disappearance, and she would not disappear willingly. Moving quickly, Bertie wrapped herself in a dark green shawl and slipped a small purse into her pocket. She took nothing else. No letters, no keepsakes, nothing that might slow her down or mark her flight as anything but desperate impulse. She braided her hair tightly and pinned it beneath a plain bonnet. In the dim light, she looked like a servant. Unremarkable. Forgettable. She opened her door and listened. The house had settled into its evening rhythms. Distant voices in the kitchens. The creak of floorboards as staff moved between duties. Silence everywhere else. Bertie stepped into the corridor and moved barefoot toward the servants' stair, her shoes clutched in one hand. No one saw her descend. No one saw her slip through the side door and into the night. The air outside was sharp and cold, cutting through the thin fabric of her dress. Bertie pulled the shawl tighter and kept moving, her stockinged feet silent against the gravel path. She did not look back. She did not allow herself to think beyond the next step, the next breath, the next moment of freedom before it could be taken from her. She walked without direction, following the line of trees that bordered the estate. The neighboring property lay somewhere beyond, vast and unfamiliar. She had heard her uncle mention it in passing. The Duke of Ravenshollow's estate. A reclusive man. A house that kept to itself. It was not a destination. It was simply a way. By the time she reached the edge of the Duke's grounds, the sky had begun to lighten. Bertie's legs trembled with exhaustion, her breath coming in short gasps. She could not stop yet. Not in the open. Not where she might be seen. Ahead, the outline of a grand house rose against the dawn. Pale stone. Tall windows. Gardens that stretched like still water in the faint light. Bertie moved toward it instinctively, searching for shelter, for somewhere to hide until she could think clearly. A side entrance stood partially open, a servant's door left unlocked in preparation for the morning. Bertie slipped inside without hesitation. The silence hit her first. No voices. No movement. Only the faint scent of old wood and leather and something floral she could not name. She found herself in a corridor lined with dark paneling, portraits staring down at her with expressions of polite indifference. She moved carefully, listening for sounds of waking staff. Nothing yet. The house still slept. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar. Bertie pushed it open and stepped into a room so vast it took her breath away. Thousands of them. Shelves rising from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes in shades of green and brown and deep burgundy. A fire burned low in the hearth, its warmth reaching across the room like an invitation. Heavy curtains framed tall windows that overlooked gardens just beginning to emerge from shadow. It was the most beautiful room Bertie had ever seen. And it was empty. She collapsed into a chair near the fire, her legs finally giving out. The warmth soaked into her bones, and for the first time since fleeing, she allowed herself to stop moving. She would rest here. Just for an hour. Just until the sun rose fully and she could think of what to do next. Her eyes closed. She did not mean to sleep. But exhaustion claimed her, and the library held her gently while the world outside began to wake. When Marcus Hale, Duke of Ravenshollow, entered his private library at dawn, he expected solitude. He had risen early, as he always did, drawn by the quiet hours before the house stirred and obligation resumed. The library was his refuge, a place of order and stillness where he could think without interruption. He stepped inside and stopped. A young woman sat curled in the chair by the fire, wrapped in a green shawl, her head tilted against the cushion in exhausted sleep. Her bonnet had slipped, revealing dark hair pinned hastily, and her stockinged feet were tucked beneath her skirts. She looked fragile, displaced, utterly out of place in his carefully ordered world. Marcus stood motionless, his mind working through possibilities. A servant who had wandered in by mistake? A guest he had not been informed of? Neither made sense. His staff knew better than to disturb this room, and he had received no visitors. Which left only one explanation. She did not belong here. He took a step closer, his footfall soft against the carpet. The sound was enough. Her eyes opened, and she jerked upright with a gasp, her gaze locking onto his with pure, undiluted fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marcus took her in fully now. The fine fabric of her dress, though rumpled and dusty. The refined line of her features. The way she held herself, even terrified, with a kind of desperate dignity. Not a servant. Not a thief. Someone fleeing. "Forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not mean." "Who are you?" His tone was measured, controlled. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She flinched anyway. She swallowed, her hands twisting in the fabric of her shawl. "I needed somewhere to rest. I did not think anyone would be here. I intended to leave before you were discovered." Marcus finished the sentence for her. "And yet here we are." Her chin lifted slightly, a flicker of defiance breaking through the fear. Here we are." He studied her in silence, watching the way she braced herself for dismissal, for judgment, for whatever consequence she believed inevitable. She expected him to summon help, to turn her out, to demand answers she was not ready to give. Instead, he crossed to the hearth and added wood to the fire. The action seemed to confuse her. She watched him warily, her body tense as if preparing to run. "You are cold," he said simply, "and exhausted. Wherever you came from, you did not arrive here easily. I should not have." "No," he agreed. "You should not have. And yet you did." He turned to face her fully, which suggests desperation rather than malice. Her breath hitched. "I am not a thief. I did not accuse you of theft." "Then what do you accuse me of?" Marcus considered the question. "Trespassing. Poor judgment. Extraordinary poor timing." He paused. "And running from something you believe worse than the risk of breaking into a stranger's home." She said nothing, but the way her hands stilled told him he had struck close to truth. He moved to the sideboard and poured tea from the pot his staff left each morning. He brought it to her without ceremony, setting the cup on the table beside her chair. "Drink," he said. "Then tell me your name." She stared at the tea as if it might be poisoned. "I am not going to harm you," Marcus said quietly. "Nor am I going to summon anyone. Not yet." "Why not?" It was a fair question. He did not have a clear answer. "Because," he said finally, "I would like to understand why a young woman of obvious education and refinement would risk everything to hide in my library." She picked up the tea with trembling hands and took a small sip. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "My name is Bertie White, and I am supposed to be married tomorrow." Marcus said nothing, but his stillness invited her to continue. "I cannot marry him," she said, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. It is not about affection or objection to the man himself. It is about what the marriage will do. What it will take from me. Your inheritance." Her eyes widened. "How did you? You said you are supposed to be married. Not that you wish to be. You spoke of what it will take, not what it will give. And you fled in the night rather than voice opposition openly." Marcus set his own cup down. That suggests coercion, legal manipulation, or both. Bertie stared at him, and for the first time since waking, the fear in her expression shifted into something else. Hope, perhaps, or recognition. My guardian arranged the marriage to settle debts, she said. Once I am wed, my inheritance passes to my husband's control. I will have no legal claim, no voice, and if I resist, I will be declared unstable. So you ran. I had no other choice. Marcus studied her in the growing light. She met his gaze without flinching now, her exhaustion visible but her resolve clear. He could send her back. He could restore order with a single word. Or he could choose differently. You may stay, he said. Bertie blinked. What? You may stay. For now. Until we determine what is to be done. He rose, his decision made. But you will remain in this wing, and you will not be seen by my staff without explanation. Is that understood? She nodded slowly, disbelief written across her face. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss White. Yes. You were right to run. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Whatever comes next, you were right to choose yourself. And with that, he left her in the library as dawn broke fully over the estate, the choice made and the story irrevocably begun. Bertie remained in the library long after the Duke departed, watching morning light spill across shelves she had no right to stand among. She had expected interrogation, judgment, swift removal. Instead, she had been offered tea and temporary refuge by a man whose expression revealed nothing and whose motives she could not begin to guess. The contradiction unsettled her more than outright hostility would have. You were right to run. The words circled her mind like birds she could not catch. They suggested understanding she had not asked for and did not entirely trust. Men in positions of power did not typically approve of women who defied expectations. Yet the Duke had spoken without condescension, without the patronizing sympathy she had learned to recognize and despise. He had simply stated fact, and then left her alone. Bertie rose unsteadily and moved toward the windows. The garden stretched before her in shades of green and gold, meticulously maintained and utterly foreign. Somewhere beyond those hedges lay the world she had fled. Her uncle's house. The marriage waiting to consume her. The trap that would close the moment she was found. She pressed her palm against the glass and made herself breathe. One day. She had bought herself one day. It would have to be enough. The door opened behind her. Bertie turned quickly, her heart lurching, but it was only a maid carrying a tray. The young woman paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to find anyone present. Begging your pardon, miss, the maid said carefully. His Grace said you might require breakfast. Bertie stared at the tray. Bread, cheese, preserves, and a pot of chocolate. Simple fare, but more than she had eaten in 2 days. Thank you, she managed. The maid set the tray on a small table and curtsied. His Grace also said you're to remain in this wing. I'll bring fresh water shortly, and there's a guest chamber just down the corridor if you'd like to rest properly. She departed before Bertie could formulate a response. Bertie ate mechanically, her mind working through implications. The Duke had given instructions, made arrangements, told his staff enough to ensure her basic needs without revealing why a strange woman had appeared in his library at dawn. It suggested both discretion and intent. The question was what kind of intent? She had just finished eating when the Duke returned. He entered without announcement, carrying several leather-bound volumes under one arm. He set them on his desk and regarded her with the same unreadable expression he had worn earlier. You slept poorly, he observed. It was not a question. Bertie touched her face self-consciously, aware of how she must look. Disheveled. Exhausted. Entirely out of place. I am grateful for the shelter, she said carefully. But I do not wish to impose further. If I might rest a few hours, I will leave before. And go where? The question stopped her. I will find somewhere, she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The Duke moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You told me your guardian arranged your marriage to settle debts. You told me your inheritance would be transferred upon marriage. What you did not tell me is who your guardian is, or why he has the authority to make such arrangements. Bertie's throat tightened. Does it matter? If I am to offer shelter, Miss White, I require truth. Not complete truth, perhaps, but enough to understand what I am sheltering you from. She wanted to refuse, to guard what little power she had left, but she had already gambled everything by fleeing. One more truth would cost her nothing she had not already lost. My guardian is Lord Edmund White, she said quietly. My mother's brother. He took me in when my parents died. I was 15. And your inheritance? My mother left a trust. Not a fortune, but enough to provide independence. It was meant to remain mine until I reached 25 or married with my consent. Bertie's hands clenched in her skirts. Lord White has debts. Significant debts. The marriage was arranged with Mr. Gerald Pritchard, a man of means who agreed to settle those debts in exchange for control of my inheritance once we wed. And you would receive what, exactly? Security. Respectability. A household of my own. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. I would receive everything a woman is supposed to want. Except choice. The Duke turned from the window. You said if you resisted, you would be declared unstable. I overheard Lord White discussing it. Women of questionable temperament lose control of their affairs quite easily. Once married, any objection I raised could be dismissed as hysteria. I would have no legal standing. So you ran rather than risk becoming a problem to be managed. Yes. Marcus studied her in silence. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, becoming almost clinical. Your uncle's debts. Do you know their extent? No. He does not discuss such matters with me. And Mr. Pritchard? What do you know of him? Bertie shook her head. Very little. He is older. A widower, I believe. He visited the house twice before the betrothal was announced. We exchanged perhaps 20 words. Yet your uncle deemed him suitable. My uncle deemed him solvent. The Duke's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. He moved to his desk and began making notes with swift, precise strokes. Bertie watched, confused by the sudden shift to action. What are you doing? She asked. Investigating. He did not look up. If your story is accurate, and I believe it is, then there are records. Debts do not materialize from nothing, and arranged marriages of this nature leave traces. You would investigate my uncle? I would investigate the truth of what you've told me. Not because I doubt you, Miss White, but because doubt without evidence is worthless. He glanced up. If you are to remain here safely, I need to understand what forces are aligned against you. Bertie felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more complicated. Why would you do this? The Duke set down his pen. Because you asked for nothing beyond shelter. Because you fled rather than submit. And because I dislike men who use law and propriety as weapons against those with no means to fight back. His gaze held hers. That is reason enough. For the first time since entering his library, Bertie felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Bertie exhaled slowly. What happens now? Now you rest while I make inquiries. If Lord White comes searching, and he will, I will handle him. He will demand my return. Let him demand. The calm certainty in his voice should have reassured her. Instead, it sparked something sharper. Bertie stepped forward, her exhaustion giving way to a clarity she had not felt since fleeing. Your Grace, she said carefully, I did not run from one man's control only to place myself under another's protection without terms. The Duke looked up, genuine surprise crossing his features for the first time. I am grateful, Bertie continued. Truly. But if you intend to help me, I need to know it will not simply mean transferring my dependence from my uncle to you. I will not be managed. Not again. Not by anyone. Silence filled the library. Marcus set down his pen and regarded her with an expression she could not read. What do you propose? He asked finally. Honesty. No decisions made about my future without my knowledge. No arrangements made on my behalf without my consent. Her voice steadied. If you investigate, I have the right to know what you discover. If Lord White comes, I will not be hidden away like a problem to be solved. I will face him. That could be dangerous. Living is dangerous. I would rather face danger with knowledge than safety through ignorance. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been approval. Very well, Miss White. Honesty and autonomy. You have my word. He extended his hand. Bertie hesitated only briefly before taking it. His grip was firm, impersonal, and strangely grounding. Then we have an understanding, she said. We do. He released her hand and returned to his desk, the moment of connection already filed away behind his usual restraint. But something had shifted between them. An alliance, tentative and undefined, but real nonetheless. Bertie moved toward the door, intending to find the guest chamber the maid had mentioned. She paused at the threshold. Your Grace. Yes. Why did you let me stay? Truly. Marcus did not look up from his work, but his answer came without hesitation. Because I have spent my entire life doing what is expected, proper, and strategic. And this morning, for the first time in recent memory, I chose to do what seemed right instead. He glanced at her briefly. I am curious to see what follows from that choice. Bertie left him to his investigation, carrying those words with her like a fragile light against approaching darkness. By afternoon, the fragile peace shattered. Bertie was resting in the guest chamber when raised voices carried from somewhere below. She rose immediately, her heart hammering, and moved to the door. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A servant's urgent tones. Then a voice she recognized with cold clarity. Her uncle. She should have stayed hidden. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the door and wait. But she had promised herself she would not hide. Not anymore. Bertie descended the main staircase and found herself in an entrance hall where 3 men stood in tense opposition. Her uncle, Lord Edmund White, his face flushed with anger. And beside him, Gerald Pritchard, the man she was meant to marry. All 3 turned as she appeared. Bertie! Her uncle's voice carried false relief. Thank God. We have been searching everywhere. Come here at once. She remained on the stairs. Miss White is a guest in my household, the Duke said calmly. She will come or stay as she chooses. She is my ward and has no business being here unchaperoned. Lord White's tone sharpened. Her behavior has been erratic for weeks. Clearly, she is unwell and requires proper care. I am not unwell, Bertie said clearly. I am unwilling. Pritchard stepped forward, his expression a mask of concern that did not reach his eyes. My dear, you have caused great distress. Whatever grievance you believe you have, it can be addressed after we are married. There will be no marriage. You are overwrought, her uncle said, not thinking clearly. His Grace will understand that young women sometimes require guidance when emotion clouds judgment. The Duke's expression remained utterly neutral. Miss White seems perfectly lucid to me. She fled in the night like a thief. She fled an arrangement she did not consent to. There is a difference. Lord White's face darkened. You have no authority here, Ravenshollow. She is my legal ward, and I demand her immediate return. And I, the Duke said softly, declined to comply. The silence that followed was absolute. Pritchard recovered first, his voice taking on a harder edge. This is highly irregular. You risk your reputation sheltering a young woman under such circumstances. My reputation will survive. The question is whether yours will, Mr. Pritchard, when it becomes known you attempted to coerce an unwilling bride through financial manipulation. Lord White sputtered. That is slander. It is fact. I have already begun investigating the particulars of your arrangement. The Duke's calm never wavered. Miss White will remain here under my protection until this matter is resolved properly. Through legal channels. With her consent at every stage. This is outrageous. This is necessary. Marcus moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. You may contact my solicitor if you wish to pursue formal proceedings. Otherwise, I suggest you leave my property. Lord White looked between the Duke and Bertie, his expression twisting between rage and calculation. Finally, he settled on the weapon he knew best. You have always been difficult, Bertie. Willful. Your mother spoiled you, and this is the result. But mark my words, your instability will be documented. Your behavior noted. And when this foolishness ends, as it must, no court will side with a hysterical girl over her lawful guardian. He turned and left, Pritchard following silently behind. The door closed. The house fell quiet again. Bertie found she could not move. Her legs had turned to water, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had stood against them. She had not bent. But the cost of that defiance was only beginning to reveal itself. The Duke approached the stairs. Miss White. She looked down at him, this stranger who had chosen alliance over order, and saw her own recognition reflected back. Shelter alone would not be enough. This was war now, and she would need more than refuge to survive it. The letter arrived 3 days after Lord White's departure. Bertie was in the library when the Duke entered carrying a folded document sealed with red wax. His expression told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. From your uncle's solicitor, Marcus said, setting the letter on the table between them. A formal demand for your return, citing his legal guardianship and your status as a ward under his authority until the age of 25 or marriage. Bertie stared at the seal without touching it. And if you refuse? He will petition the courts. Argue that I am harboring you unlawfully. Claim that your presence here damages your reputation and his ability to fulfill his duties as guardian. Marcus paused. He will also argue that your flight demonstrates instability requiring his intervention. The same argument he made when he came here. Yes. Except now it will be made formally, with legal weight behind it. Bertie rose and moved to the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Beyond the glass, the garden stretched in perfect order, beautiful and utterly indifferent to the chaos unfolding within the house. She had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it. Yet hearing the reality spoken aloud made her chest tighten with something close to panic. How long do we have? She asked. A week. Perhaps 2 if we delay the response strategically. Marcus joined her at the window, maintaining a careful distance. But delay will not solve the fundamental problem. Which is? That legally he is correct. You are his ward. He has authority over you until you reach 25 or marry with his consent. And he will never grant that consent to anyone who does not serve his interests. Bertie closed her eyes. So I ran for nothing. No. The firmness in his voice surprised her. You ran to buy yourself time. And we will use that time. She turned to face him. How? You said yourself he has legal authority. He does. But authority can be challenged if we have evidence of malfeasance. Marcus returned to the desk and extracted a thin portfolio. I have spent the past 3 days investigating your uncle's financial arrangements. What I have found is illuminating. He opened the portfolio and spread several documents across the desk. Bertie approached slowly, her heart hammering. These are copies of correspondence between your uncle and Mr. Pritchard, Marcus explained. Obtained discreetly through my solicitor's contacts. They detail the terms of your betrothal with remarkable clarity. Bertie scanned the pages, her eyes catching on phrases that made her stomach turn. Bertie transfer of trust assets upon marriage. Bertie immediate settlement of outstanding debts totaling £4,000. Bertie waiver of consent requirements given ward's documented instability. Bertie. He planned this, she whispered. Every detail. This. Including the narrative of your instability. There are letters here from a physician your uncle consulted, describing symptoms of nervous agitation and emotional volatility. Marcus's jaw tightened. Symptoms you never displayed because he never brought you to be examined. The letters are fabrications, created to establish a record should you resist. Bertie's hands shook as she set down the papers. Then we have proof. We can show the courts he manipulated everything. We can try. But these documents were obtained through irregular channels. A court may refuse to admit them as evidence. Marcus met her gaze steadily. And even if they are admitted, your uncle will argue that his intentions were protective, that he sought to secure your future through marriage to a respectable man, that your flight proves the very instability he documented. So we cannot win. Not through conventional legal challenge. Not quickly enough to prevent him from reclaiming you while the case proceeds. He paused. But there is another option. Something in his tone made Bertie's breath catch. What option? Marcus returned to the window, his posture rigid. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Marriage to me would void your uncle's guardianship immediately. As a married woman, you would be legally independent of his authority. He could not reclaim you, could not control your inheritance, could not force you into any arrangement against your will. The silence that followed was absolute. Bertie stared at him, certain she had misheard. You are proposing marriage. I am proposing a legal solution to an untenable situation. Those are the same thing. Not necessarily. Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. I am not proposing romance, Miss White. I am proposing protection through a marriage of convenience. A formal arrangement that serves a strategic purpose. Bertie's mind reeled. You would marry me to prevent my uncle from reclaiming me. I would marry you to give you the legal independence you cannot otherwise obtain. After which you would be free to live as you choose, within the bounds of propriety. Free. The word tasted bitter. Except I would be your wife. In name only. His gaze never wavered. I am offering alliance, not ownership. You would have your own chambers, your own pursuits, your own life. I would ask nothing of you beyond basic discretion and the appearance of respectability when required. Bertie moved away from him, her thoughts churning. And what would you gain from this arrangement? The satisfaction of preventing an injustice. That is not an answer. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, revealing something that might have been weariness. You are correct. It is not. He crossed his arms. I would gain the knowledge that I used my position to help someone who had no other recourse. I would gain a household arrangement that requires minimal adjustment to my existing routines. And I would gain the certainty that you are safe from men who would use law as a weapon. You make it sound remarkably practical. Because it is practical. I am not a romantic, Miss White. I am offering you a transaction. One that benefits us both. Bertie pressed her hands against the desk, her knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. She had fled one arranged marriage. Accepting another, even under different terms, felt like surrender. I did not run only to trade one form of control for another, she said quietly. I know. Marcus moved closer but did not touch her. Which is why I am proposing terms, not demands. You would retain control of your inheritance. You would have autonomy within this household. And should you wish to end the arrangement after a reasonable period, I would not oppose a legal separation. You would allow me to leave? I would not allow anything. You would choose to leave or stay as you saw fit. He paused. I am offering protection, Miss White. Not imprisonment. She wanted to believe him. Desperately. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. What if you change your mind? She asked. What if a year from now you decide this arrangement no longer suits you? I would have no recourse. A wife has no legal standing against her husband. Then we establish terms in writing. Witnessed and documented. Not legally binding, perhaps, but clear evidence of our agreement should disputes arise. Marcus returned to his desk and withdrew paper. Tell me what assurances you require, and I will commit them to record. Bertie stared at him. You would do that? Yes. Why? Because you asked. And because your autonomy matters more than my convenience. Something in her chest loosened. Not trust, exactly. But the possibility of it. She took the paper and began to write. The terms took 2 days to negotiate. Bertie drafted. Marcus reviewed. They debated language, clarified boundaries, removed ambiguities. It was not a romantic process. It was meticulous and occasionally frustrating and strangely grounding. By the time they finished, Bertie held a document that outlined every aspect of their proposed arrangement with ruthless clarity. Separate chambers. Independent finances. No expectation of intimacy. Freedom to pursue her own interests. The right to leave after 2 years if either party wished to dissolve the arrangement. Marcus signed without hesitation. Bertie watched his signature take shape and felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her like a shroud. "Are you certain?" she asked. He looked up. "Are you?" "No. But I am out of alternatives." "That is not the same as consent." Bertie met his gaze. "I consent to this arrangement under the terms we have established. Not happily, but willingly. Then we have an agreement." The marriage took place 4 days later in the Duke's private chapel. No guests. No celebration. Only Marcus, Bertie, a nervous clergyman, and 2 servants as witnesses. Bertie wore a simple dress of pale blue. Marcus wore black. They spoke their vows in voices devoid of emotion and signed the register with hands that did not tremble. When it was done, Bertie was a duchess. She felt nothing. The clergyman departed with a purse of coins and instructions to file the marriage record immediately. Marcus escorted Bertie back to the main house in silence. They parted in the entrance hall without ceremony. "Your chambers have been prepared," he said. "If you require anything, inform the housekeeper." "Thank you." He inclined his head and left. Bertie stood alone in the hall and wondered what she had just done. The news spread through society with predictable speed. Within a week, Bertie found herself the subject of speculation she could feel even from within the estate's walls. The servants whispered. Letters arrived from acquaintances Marcus had not spoken to in years, all expressing surprise and thinly veiled curiosity. An announcement appeared in the morning papers, brief and formal, stating only that the Duke of Ravenshollow had married Miss Bertie White in a private ceremony. Lord White's response came in the form of a scathing letter delivered directly to Marcus. Bertie read it in the library, her hands steady despite the vitriol contained within. "Bertie, you have acted dishonorably and with complete disregard for propriety. My niece was disturbed and vulnerable, and you took advantage of her condition to secure an inappropriate alliance. This marriage will be challenged. Mark my words, Ravenshollow, this matter is far from settled, Bertie." Marcus barely glanced at the letter when she showed it to him. Empty threats. The marriage is legal and properly recorded. He has no grounds for challenge. He will try anyway. Let him try. Bertie folded the letter carefully. "Does this not concern you? He could damage your reputation." "My reputation will survive gossip. Yours is the one that requires protection." Marcus returned to the documents he had been reviewing. Do not let his anger distract you from the fact that you are now legally beyond his reach. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt precarious. Bertie settled into her new role with careful precision. She learned the household routines, met with the housekeeper, familiarized herself with the estate's rhythms. The servants treated her with polite deference that felt more like uncertainty than respect. She was a duchess now, but one who had appeared without warning and married without courtship. She took her meals alone unless Marcus specifically requested her presence. She spent her days in the library or walking the gardens. She maintained the emotional distance their arrangement required. But beneath the careful restraint, something unexpected began to grow. It started with small observations. The way Marcus ensured the library fire was lit before she woke each morning. How he asked her opinion on household matters and actually listened to her answers. The books that appeared on her reading table, selected based on passing comments she had made days earlier. He never intruded, never demanded, never treated her as anything less than his equal in their strange partnership. And slowly, carefully, Bertie began to trust him. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough to meet his eyes during dinner. Enough to remain when he entered a room rather than immediately withdrawing. Enough to engage in actual conversation rather than polite formalities. Marcus, for his part, maintained his disciplined restraint. If he noticed the shift, he gave no indication. He treated her with the same measured respect he had shown from the beginning, never pushing for more than she offered. It was not affection, but it was not indifference either. 2 months after their marriage, Bertie sat in the library reading correspondence when Marcus entered carrying a legal document. His expression was grim. "Your uncle has filed a formal petition," he said without preamble. requesting annulment on the grounds that you were not of sound mind when the marriage took place, and that I coerced you while you were under duress." Bertie set down her letter. "Can he do that?" "He can petition. Whether he will succeed is another matter." Marcus handed her the document. "But we will need to respond formally, which means appearing before magistrates, answering questions about the circumstances of our marriage. They will ask if I was coerced." "Yes. And if I say I was not, my uncle will claim I am still unstable, that I cannot judge my own condition." "Most likely." Bertie read through the petition, her stomach sinking with every line. This was not empty threat. This was strategy. Her uncle intended to dismantle her marriage piece by piece until she was returned to his authority. She looked up at Marcus, standing rigid and controlled as always, and saw the same recognition in his eyes. Shelter had not been enough. Marriage had not been enough. And now they would have to fight for something neither of them had wanted in the first place, but both refused to surrender. The hearing was scheduled for a cold morning in late November, held in chambers that smelled of old wood and older power. Bertie sat beside Marcus in a room designed to intimidate, surrounded by paneled walls and stern portraits of magistrates long dead. Across from them, Lord White and Mr. Pritchard occupied chairs with the confidence of men who believed victory inevitable. Between them sat 3 magistrates who would decide whether her marriage was valid or merely the desperate act of an unstable mind. She had dressed carefully that morning, not as a supplicant seeking sympathy, but as a woman prepared to defend herself. Dark green silk, simply cut. Her hair arranged with precision. No ornamentation beyond her wedding ring, which she wore deliberately where everyone could see it. Marcus had said nothing when she descended the stairs, but something in his expression suggested approval. Now, as the senior magistrate shuffled papers and cleared his throat, Bertie felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. Shelter, alliance, marriage, each one a calculated risk, each one bringing her closer to either freedom or complete destruction. "We are convened," the magistrate began, his voice carrying the dry authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, "to examine a petition filed by Lord Edmund White requesting annulment of the marriage between his former ward, Miss Bertie White, and His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshollow, on grounds of coercion and mental incapacity." Lord White leaned forward. "If I may, the circumstances surrounding this marriage are highly irregular. My niece fled my household in a state of extreme agitation on the eve of her arranged marriage. She was found days later having taken refuge with the Duke, a man she had never met. Within weeks, they were married under circumstances that can only be described as suspicious." "Suspicious how?" the magistrate asked. "My niece was vulnerable, distressed, and not in her right mind. She had displayed signs of instability for months prior to her flight: nervousness, emotional volatility, an inability to accept proper guidance. The Duke took advantage of her condition to secure an advantageous marriage." Marcus's voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "That is an interesting interpretation of events that conveniently omits Lord White's own role in creating his niece's distress." The magistrate's eyebrow lifted. "You wish to respond, Your Grace?" "I do." Marcus rose, his posture formal but his tone edged with something harder than usual. "Miss White, now the Duchess of Ravenshollow, fled not because of instability but because she discovered her uncle intended to use her marriage to settle his substantial debts through transfer of her inheritance. An inheritance legally hers, which he had no right to appropriate." Lord White's face flushed. "That is absurd. The marriage to Mr. Pritchard was arranged for her protection and future security. The marriage was arranged to transfer £4,000 from Miss White's trust to Mr. Pritchard in exchange for his agreement to settle your gambling debts." Marcus nodded to his solicitor, who produced a portfolio of documents. "We have correspondence proving the arrangement. Letters between you and Mr. Pritchard detailing the financial terms with remarkable specificity." The magistrates leaned forward, their interest sharpening. Lord White's solicitor intervened quickly. "Even if such correspondence exists, it does not negate the fact that Miss White was legally under her guardian's authority. Her flight was irrational. Her decision to marry without his consent demonstrates exactly the kind of impulsive behavior that concerns us. Impulsive. Marcus's tone could have frozen water. She fled an arranged marriage designed to rob her of her inheritance. She sought shelter when she had nowhere else to turn. And she agreed to marry me only after we established clear terms protecting her autonomy. That is not impulse. That is survival. Pritchard spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Grace, no one questions your intentions. But surely you must see how this appears. A young woman in distress. A powerful man offering protection. The inherent imbalance of power makes genuine consent questionable. Then let us ask the woman herself. Marcus looked directly at the magistrates. Miss White has been present throughout this proceeding but has not yet been permitted to speak. I suggest we remedy that. The senior magistrate nodded slowly. A reasonable request. Madam, you may address the court. Bertie rose. Every eye in the room fixed on her. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, their skepticism, their predetermined conclusions about what a proper woman should be and do. For a moment, fear threatened to silence her. Then she remembered the library at dawn. The choice Marcus had offered her. The alliance they had built from nothing but necessity and mutual respect. She would not be silent. Gentlemen, she began, her voice steady, I appreciate your concern for my well-being. But I must correct several misapprehensions about my character and my choices. Lord White started to interrupt. The magistrate raised a hand, silencing him. Bertie continued. I did not flee my uncle's house because of instability. I fled because I overheard him discussing how my marriage would strip me of legal standing and transfer control of my inheritance to Mr. Pritchard. I fled because I understood that once married, any objection I raised would be dismissed as hysteria. I fled because remaining meant disappearing. You were overwrought, Lord White insisted, misunderstanding what you heard. I understood perfectly. Bertie's gaze never wavered from the magistrates. My uncle incurred substantial debts through gambling. Mr. Pritchard agreed to settle those debts in exchange for access to my trust. The marriage was never about my welfare. It was a financial transaction in which I was the commodity being sold. One of the magistrates frowned. These are serious allegations. They are documented facts. Bertie gestured to the portfolio Marcus's solicitor held. The correspondence between my uncle and Mr. Pritchard details every aspect of their arrangement, including provisions for managing my expected resistance through medical documentation of instability I never actually displayed. Pritchard's expression tightened. This is preposterous. Is it? Bertie turned to face him directly. Then explain the letters from Dr. Hammond describing my nervous condition and emotional volatility. Letters dated weeks before you ever brought me to be examined. Letters describing symptoms I never exhibited because the examinations never occurred. Silence fell. The magistrate extended his hand. May I see these letters? Marcus's solicitor provided them immediately. The magistrates reviewed the documents with increasing attention, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concentration to something that might have been anger. Lord White, the senior magistrate said carefully, can you explain how your physician documented symptoms without examining the patient? The symptoms were observed by household staff. Dr. Hammond simply recorded what I reported. So you instructed a physician to create medical documentation of instability based solely on your observations, without independent examination or verification. Lord White's solicitor intervened desperately. My client acted out of concern for his niece's well-being. Your client fabricated evidence to support a forced marriage designed to transfer his ward's assets to a third party for debt settlement. The magistrate's voice had gone cold. That is not concern. That is exploitation. Bertie felt something loosen in her chest. They were listening. Actually listening. The second magistrate looked at her directly. Madam, you maintain that your marriage to the Duke was voluntary? Yes. Despite the unusual circumstances? The circumstances were unusual because my options were limited. But within those limitations, I chose freely. Bertie met his gaze without flinching. The Duke offered me protection without demanding control. He proposed terms that preserved my autonomy. We negotiated our arrangement with complete honesty about what it was and was not. That is more respect than any other man has shown me. But you married a stranger. I married an ally. Someone who chose to help me when no one else would. Someone who listened when I said I would not trade one form of control for another. Her voice strengthened. I made my choice with full knowledge and clear mind. And I would make it again. Marcus stood beside her, his presence solid and grounding. When he spoke, his tone carried quiet conviction. Gentlemen, I married Miss White because she deserved protection I could provide. Not because I sought advantage. Not because I wished to control her. But because she fled injustice and found herself without recourse. He paused. I offered marriage as a legal shield. She accepted under negotiated terms that preserve her independence. We have maintained those terms faithfully, and I will continue to do so regardless of this court's decision. The third magistrate, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. Your Grace, you understand that defending this marriage may damage your reputation? Society will speculate about your motives. Let them speculate. I have done nothing dishonorable. And if we rule against you? If we grant the annulment? Marcus's jaw tightened. Then I will have failed to protect someone who deserved protection. But my conscience will remain clear. The magistrates conferred in low voices. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Bertie remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, refusing to show fear even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, the senior magistrate spoke. We have reviewed the evidence presented. The correspondence between Lord White and Mr. Pritchard clearly establishes a financial arrangement centered on Miss White's inheritance. The fabricated medical documentation demonstrates intent to undermine her credibility should she resist. And Miss White's testimony demonstrates clear understanding of her circumstances and choices. He looked directly at Lord White. Your petition for annulment is denied. Lord White shot to his feet. This is outrageous. Furthermore, the magistrate continued, his voice hardening, we find your conduct as guardian deeply troubling. You manipulated your position of trust for personal financial gain. You attempted to coerce your ward into marriage through fabricated evidence of instability. And you have wasted this court's time with a petition designed solely to regain control of assets you have no legal right to access. I acted within my authority. You exceeded your authority dramatically. Miss White's marriage to the Duke is valid and legally binding. Her inheritance remains hers, now under her husband's protection per standard marriage law, but beyond your reach entirely. The magistrate gathered his papers with finality. This matter is concluded. The marriage stands. The sound of the gavel was the sweetest thing Bertie had ever heard. Lord White and Pritchard departed in furious silence, their scheme exposed and their reputations in tatters. Marcus's solicitor gathered the documents with quiet satisfaction. The magistrates filed out, their judgment rendered and recorded. And Bertie stood in the emptying chamber, feeling the ground beneath her feet solid for the first time in months. It is done, Marcus said quietly. She turned to him. Yes. You are safe. Legally protected. Free from your uncle's authority. Yes. Something in her tone made him pause. But... Bertie took a breath. Our marriage served its purpose. The threat is gone. I am legally independent now, which means the original reason for our arrangement no longer exists. Understanding crossed his features. You wish to discuss dissolution. I wish to discuss choice. She met his eyes. When we married, I had none. Now I do. And I need to know, do you wish me to stay? Or would you prefer I leave with dignity while we can still part as allies? Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. What do you wish? I asked first. So you did. He moved toward the window, his posture rigid. I have spent my entire life maintaining control. Order. Distance. It seemed safer that way. Less complicated. And now I find that the complications you introduced into my carefully ordered life have become the only parts one value. He turned to face her. I do not wish you to leave, Bertie. Not for appearance's sake. Not for legal protection. But because I have grown accustomed to your presence. Your conversation. Your refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would have broken someone with less courage. Bertie's breath caught. That sounds remarkably like affection. It is affection. Respect. Admiration. Marcus took a step closer. I did not intend to feel any of those things. But intentions matter less than truth. And the truth is that somewhere between offering you shelter and defending you in court, I stopped viewing this marriage as obligation and started viewing it as choice. What kind of choice? The kind I am making now. Freely. Without coercion or necessity. His gaze held hers. I choose you, Bertie. Not as duty. Not as strategy. But because you are brave and brilliant and you transformed my library from a refuge into something that feels remarkably like home. Tears burned behind Bertie's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You are saying you wish me to stay. I am saying I hope you will stay. There is a difference. Marcus extended his hand. Our original arrangement gave you the right to leave after 2 years. I will honor that. But I am asking, not demanding, that you consider remaining. Not as my convenient solution, but as my wife. My partner. My choice. Bertie stared at his outstretched hand, thinking of everything that had led to this moment. Alliance built on necessity. Respect earned through restraint. And now choice. Real choice. Offered freely by a man who had never demanded anything she was not willing to give. She took his hand. I ran once because I had no other option, she said. I will not run now when I have every option available and still choose to stay. Her fingers tightened around his. I choose you too, Marcus. Not because you offer protection, but because you offer partnership. Because you listened when no one else would. Because you defended me without trying to own me. That is all. And because somewhere between negotiating terms and fighting legal battles, I started looking forward to seeing you each morning. Started valuing your opinion above my own solitude. Started believing that perhaps marriage need not mean imprisonment if entered into by two people who respect each other enough to remain equals. Marcus pulled her closer, slowly enough that she could have withdrawn if she wished. When she did not, his arms came around her with careful certainty. Then we are agreed, he said against her hair. No more necessity. No more strategy. Just choice. Just choice, Bertie repeated. They stood together in the empty chamber, holding each other not from obligation but desire, and felt the foundation of their marriage shift from alliance into something neither had planned but both recognized. Love had not been part of their arrangement, but love, it seemed, had arranged itself anyway. 3 months later, Bertie sat in the library reading correspondence while Marcus worked at his desk. It had become their routine. Mornings spent in comfortable silence, afternoons devoted to separate pursuits, evenings spent in conversation that ranged from trivial to profound. The room had changed since that first desperate morning. Books Bertie favored now shared shelf space with Marcus's political treatises. Her correspondence occupied half the desk. A second chair had appeared beside the fire, positioned close enough for companionship but far enough for independence. It was still his library, but it had become theirs. Letter from your uncle, Marcus said, breaking the silence. Requesting reconciliation. Bertie set down her own letter. What does he offer? Apology. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing. A promise to respect your independence henceforth. Marcus's tone suggested skepticism. Also a request for financial assistance with certain pressing debts. Of course. Bertie was unsurprised. What do you recommend? That is not my decision. He is your family, not mine. Bertie considered. Once, Lord White's approval had mattered desperately. His rejection had shaped years of her life. But that woman seemed impossibly distant now. Decline, she said. Politely, but firmly. He made his choices. I have made mine. Marcus nodded and set the letter aside. As you wish. They returned to their work. Outside, early spring rain fell gently against the windows. Somewhere in the house, servants moved through their routines. The estate functioned with the steady rhythm Marcus preferred, interrupted now only by Bertie's presence and the changes she had introduced with his blessing. She glanced at him across the desk, watching him read with the focused intensity she had come to recognize and value. He looked up, catching her gaze. "What?" he asked. "I was remembering the morning you found me here. How terrified I was. How certain that discovery meant the end of everything. And instead it was the beginning." Bertie smiled. "Strange how the worst morning of my life became the best decision I never planned to make." Marcus set down his pen and moved around the desk. He took the chair beside hers, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about our arrangement." Bertie's heart skipped. "Oh, the terms we negotiated, the boundaries we established. They served their purpose admirably." He paused. "But I wonder if perhaps they have become unnecessarily restrictive." "How so?" "We maintained separate chambers. Scrupulously observed distance in public. Careful emotional restraint." Marcus turned to face her fully. "These were necessary when our marriage was purely strategic. But if we have moved beyond strategy into genuine partnership, are you asking to renegotiate our terms?" Bertie interrupted, amusement coloring her voice. "I am suggesting that perhaps the terms designed to protect you from unwanted obligation might now be preventing something we both want." "And what is it you want, Marcus?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles. "I want to stop maintaining careful distance when what I desire is closeness. I want to stop treating this marriage as arrangement and start embracing it as choice. I want—" He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "I want to wake beside you and know it is because we both chose it, not because duty demanded it." Bertie felt warmth spread through her chest. "That sounds remarkably like a proposal." "It is a proposal. A renegotiation of terms between equals who have discovered that protection has transformed into partnership and partnership into something deeper still." "Love," Bertie said simply. "You can say it." "Love," Marcus agreed, "though I have no experience with it and likely will navigate it poorly." "We will navigate it poorly together. That seems appropriately equitable." He laughed, the sound rare enough to be precious. Then, with the same careful deliberation he brought to everything, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was not their first kiss. They had exchanged brief, formal kisses after their wedding and occasionally since. But this was different. This carried intention, promise, choice freely made and freely returned. When they finally drew apart, Bertie rested her forehead against his. "So," she said, "new terms. What do you propose?" "That we dispense with terms entirely. That we simply be husband and wife as we define it. Together. Without obligation or restraint beyond what we mutually choose. No more separate chambers? Not unless you prefer them. No more careful distance? Only when circumstances require it. No more treating this marriage as strategy? Never again." Marcus pulled her closer. "Only choice. Only partnership. Only this." Bertie kissed him again, tasting possibility and promise and the strange miracle of a marriage begun in desperation and transformed by choice into something neither had expected but both recognized as exactly what they needed. "Agreed," she whispered against his lips. "No more strategy. Just us." Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside the library where Bertie had once hidden in terror and Marcus had offered unexpected mercy, they held each other and felt the last vestiges of their careful arrangement dissolve into something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. Love had not been part of the plan. But then, the best things rarely were. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Until then, may all your escapes lead to unexpected beginnings.